Hi everyone, and welcome back to this another session, which is actually a keynote session by our sponsor Conviva. And this session, will be hosted by James Lamberti, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Conviva. It will be a keynote session on how do we unlock the streaming audience opportunity in advertising. James, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. A little bit of technical delay. I appreciate you hanging on a moment while we figured it out. Introducing the session, why don't spend 20 minutes in a lightning talk taking you through how it is we unlock the streaming advertising opportunity and the need for technology to do so. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If you can go to the next slide, please. First, a little bit about Conviva. So we're qualified to have this discussion with you. We've been at this for over a decade. Most major premium streaming services in the world have launched and use Conviva's technology, right? So 58 patents. And as you all probably are aware, the internet was not technically built to stream video, right? So it requires an incredible investment in technology to get it to work, and measurement is no different, which is what we're going to talk about. Go to the next slide, please. And why is this so important? What we've seen is over the past few years of the pandemic, and even as we hopefully leave that behind us, streaming grew incredibly, right? We're talking about close to 300% growth in the past 3 years. And we are at the precipice of streaming overtaking linear as the big screen format of choice for consumers. So we are at a point where we have to figure this out. It's obviously an issue that can't continue to linger if we're going to monetize the advertising world and our businesses from an AVOD perspective. Similar to linear, we have to figure this out in streaming. Next slide, please. So jumping in, really the problem is this: measurement is not ready. We have a lot of technical issues in the way of unlocking streaming measurement. First of all, you've got multiple point solutions, right? Multiple data sources, all independently being sourced from typically biased to various devices. And oftentimes that data is owned by some other third party, right? You've got very heavy reliance on sampling and modeling, as you know, right? And this has been fine when we were in this monolithic linear era, just a few channels, but been an incredibly fragmented, device fragmented, audience fragmented environment. Sampling and modeling is starting to fall apart, as you've seen, right? Standards need to be developed. The ability to interoperate together, right? So that we can activate and understand audience in brand A versus brand B. And then finally, advertisers wanting to be more confident and comfortable investing in streaming. All of these get in the way of really the opportunity. So how do we solve them? If you go to the next slide, there are 5 pillars of technology that need to solve for this problem. Next slide, please. Those pillars are really foundational technology aspects. And the point here is that in order to solve what is an incredibly technical or technically driven problem, we need to resort to technology, right? That is the hypothesis here, or the approach. And there are 5 pillars: comprehensive. We're going to talk about every one: comprehensive, census level, and standardize. Those 3 today are call it generally available anywhere in the world, right? The last 2, what we call audience clustering and interoperability, are 2 that are deep in beta in the US market. I'll show you a case study on where we're at. And we will be rolling those 2 into the UK, Australia, Japan markets next in the back of the year. So I want to start with our first pillar. If you go to the next slide. Comprehensive. Next slide, please. So comprehensive, what do you mean by that? What we mean is every viewer, every device, right? Period. And so the investment you heard about and that I mentioned to you, there is not a device that we have yet to see that we cannot comprehensively cover using our technology and getting all the rich contextual metadata that we need, right? And we're talking, a couple hundred different data points that we're able to see. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you an example from our state of streaming report, right? Here you're looking at an aggregation from all over the world, right? When I showed you that slide earlier, there are billions of streams that we're collecting, trillions of data points across about 500 million viewers. This is an aggregate view consolidated down to show the growth year over year from our state of streaming report, which I encourage you to download. What's interesting here, as you can see, is that mobile is really the driving engine for growth along with smart TV. Why is that the case? Mobile is being increasingly used for short form video, mostly social type of video, right? Snack size, super convenient. Smart TVs are also the driver on the big screen, which is where I think some of the most creative and exciting advertising opportunities are. Now, if we want to double click on the large screen and go to the next slide, please. Here you can see the depth of device. We're talking comprehensive data, year over year growth for every single large screen. This is just a sampling of the biggest ones. There are dozens. But here you can see that the fast channels and the manufacturers are now aggressively entering this game of actually controlling, right, their own destiny and having streaming content services built into those devices via smart TV as well. So this is just an example of what we mean by comprehensive. I want to move now to the next slide and take you through the second pillar. That is census level. This one is, I think, probably one of the most important to unlock measurement properly. If you think about going to the next slide, please, if you think about what we've done historically, it's been sampling. It's been event-based. We've used pixels and beacons, often different multi-point solutions. What we really have the opportunity in front of us today to do is move from sampling. And if we go to the next slide, obviously the punchline is you've got census level. This is, I think, in a highly fragmented, technically driven environment, we need to just move to census level on the data. And we have the opportunity to do it. Like I said, it's available underfoot today for every streaming provider out there working and partnering with Conviva. So if you go now to the third pillar, move to the next slide, we'll talk about standardized. This is an incredibly powerful concept. It seems almost too good to be true, to be frank. When you move to the next slide, I'll explain what standardized is. But here we're taking that census level view, and every individual brand or publisher or AVOD, SVOD service that's leveraging our technology has the exact same data structure. We're not talking normalization, right? Every individual player can normalize their data, every individual company. We're talking about a standardized, consistent data model that is applied and immediately out of the box. If I'm dealing with, advertising streaming service A and advertising streamer service B, all that data is automatically consistent. So we're putting ourselves technically in a position to have a standardized understanding of data and measurement. And just to give you an example of that on the next slide, this is probably data some of it you've never seen before, right? This is advertising data, right? Ad impressions, ad attempts, duration, bitrate, buffering, ad playback failure, missed ad opportunities, start failures, exits before ad start, right? All of this really rich data. These are examples of quality, again, from our state of streaming report, but they're examples of the types of data and information that are standardized across all players that are sitting today available to us. So let's move to the fourth pillar. Now, this fourth pillar I mentioned, this first three I mentioned, so comprehensive, standardized, census level, are all underfoot today. They're available to us today anywhere in the world. These next two are in beta, deep in beta, and they're the most important. Of course, we're very far along in the US, and I'll show you case studies, and then we'll talk about how we're going to be rolling this into Europe and Japan and Australia in the back half of the year. So if we move to the next slide, we'll talk about the fourth pillar here. Next slide, please. Audience clustering. So this is an incredibly important concept that I'll explain. Next slide, please. Here we have the ability to take all of that device level and viewer level data and cluster it And this is done first party. This is done in a privacy secure way, compliant with whatever laws exist in whatever country we're doing business in. And you keep in mind, we're using the census level first party information of the publisher, of the streamer, the video host. And so we're always going to be in a position where we can provide the highest fidelity model possible. So we first are able to cluster these households and these devices into pods or cohorts. And then if you go to the next slide, we're able to then enrich that data as needed. So for example, in the US market, we've partnered with Experian, TransUnion. We've done matches on behalf of the publishers to bring in familiar data. So for example, in the UK, there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't be partnering with Experian or in other parts of Europe, other data providers. This is a huge way to link or tie linear audience measurement to streaming and have an advertiser and agency able to view your audience comprehensively across streaming and linear in the same sort of familiar way. Okay. So if we want to move to the next slide, please. We'll talk about the last pillar, interoperable. Here is where we take that cluster model, right? And we're able to link it, like I said, link it to, today we're doing Experian and TransUnion. We can actually get to where we're doing cross-platform measurement. I'll show you examples. We've done trials with major partners with Comscore, Ispot, OpenAP, VideoAmp, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, in order to get the campaign data, we're beginning to work with all the major ad servers, the supply-side ad servers, to be able to aggregate everything around a campaign, even in the streaming world, right, to unlock that aspect. And so this bridge ID or linking capability, again, through the first party, cohorted, privacy secure, is a huge unlock. Let me move to the next slide and show you an example. Now, you can imagine, right? And this is hypothetical, right? These are all customers of ours, but what I've explained to you allows every single one of these players, if they wanted, to provide and present a deduplicated view of their audience, right? We've solved for the technical issues. What we now are left with is these various publishers around the world deciding they want to work together to do this and how they want to do that. And that is really the conversation we're now starting to have everywhere in the world, and particularly in the US. And just to show you who's involved, if you go to the next slide today, there is work being done. We did huge cross-platform measurement projects for the Super Bowl, for the Olympics, which is a global event, and then for the NCAA men's basketball tournament, a huge globally appealing basketball tournament. But certainly the Olympics and the Super Bowl are familiar events all around the world. If we go to the next slide, these are the folks involved, right? We've got those 3 tentpole events: Peacock, Paramount, Warner, Viacom, CDS. And then we had 3 major cross-platform companies who all did successful projects to basically to deduplicate and combine their streaming audience with their linear audience and present that view back to advertisers. We did that with Comscore, Ispot, and VideoAmp, and I'll share with you a couple of the results as we wind up our discussion today. So if you go to the next slide, here we see the results of the Super Bowl. Streaming audience, there was a little under 11 million streaming, peaking at 8:25 p.m. that evening. And on Peacock, 70.1% of Peacock occurred on televisions with a Roku, Samsung, or Amazon Fire, right? And then finally, of those 11 million, almost 11 million, 70% were cord cutters, meaning the only access they had was through streaming. They had no bundled cable service anymore, right? So basically, we're talking about 7 million unique streaming audience folks that you would not have seen without this capability. If we move to the next slide, with Ispot, right, they were able to show a variety of cross-platform numbers, right? 150 million people, a total deduplicated audience across streaming and linear, right? The average streaming minute audience was just over 10.5 with 15.5 million total. And you can see some of the other stats. We also have another trial we can talk about with Warner. If you go to the next slide. So Warner wanted to look at and explore multiple currencies. So moving out of a world where we're just dealing with one currency as an industry, but allowing ourselves to have multiple currencies. So this is where VideoAmp, Ispot, and ComScore all got involved. And if you look at the next slide, we saw incredibly successful tests, right, where we're able to match streaming audience to an Experian audience view, right, at 90%. And then 98% of the census level streaming audience we saw was incremental to anything else that was being measured. So using these data sciences approach was fundamentally to miss audience. So this is what I wanted to leave you with. If you go to the last slide, we talked about 5 pillars, right? We talked about comprehensive, right? We talked about standardized. We talked about census level. That is the building blocks. Technically, the problem has been solved from a pure measurement perspective. What's left now is to work through the business problems, right? How do we make sure that interoperability is there and present in the industry? That is what we're doing in the US. We will be announcing a GA product as part of CES in Vegas early in the year. And in the back half of the year, we will begin to work throughout the UK and Japan and Australia to do the same thing. So this is happening. This is coming. The key is the technical aspects are largely solved for. It's really now about, from a business perspective, how do we create the right partnerships and the right strategies and unlock it for the brands and buyers? With that, I will open it up to Q&A, and I really appreciate your time over in Europe today. I wish I was there to join you.
Yes, we do have some questions for you, actually. One is, how do you handle the stricter privacy laws in Europe versus the US?
Yeah, so good question. I mentioned that. So we have to remember this technology it's first party, right? So it's resident in the first party. Very different than probably what you're familiar with, which is third parties sitting outside the publisher. So that right away solves for a lot of problems. In the case of this technology, the technical term is, we act as a processor. The publisher is actually the controller. The other thing is that it's in some ways future-proof, because technically what's happening is we're always going to be using, because we're first party, we're going to be using the best available data with whatever privacy laws there are, and however they change, we're always going to have the best possible view of things to create what we call an audience cluster. And then finally, the audience cluster, right? It's a cohort, right? We're sort of following the lead of the industry to create cohorts like Google has been doing and talking about. We will be able to do the same thing. So that is a good question, but that's fundamentally how we're handling it.
All right, moving on to the last question. Why has the advertising buy-side community never heard of this technology?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. They'll start to. So I think what's different about the approach is it's a publisher-first approach, right? It's going to go through the publishers, who are then going to start to disclose it in the way you're starting to see some of the experiments and case studies I showed, right? So there'll be a big education effort that talks about this technology and this data. There'll be a level of certification required, right? Will, just like the MRC or Ernst & Young audits, we'll make sure that people understand technically what we're doing, that we certify, and then when these cross-platform measurements come through, they'll be a powered by or a Conviva certified, and people will begin to understand the quality and the accuracy and be able to review the standards just like any other standard. So that is, frankly, it's going to be relatively trivial aspect because of everything I described technically, right? Comprehensive, standardized, census level, hard to argue with the accuracy you're going to get. So.
Well, with that answers, I would like to thank you, James, for your time for this keynote session, which was really interesting. And we'll move on in a couple of minutes after a short break for a panel discussion on the audience measurement in the digital environment, which will be moderated by Monique van der Soldorf. And I would like to thank you, everyone, and thank you, James, for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.